Overthinkers, it's me, your girl, Alanna Grace, and I'm coming to you today with a little bit of a different episode. This one is a solo, and we've not had one of those in a little while, but this episode is also a little bit of a meditation. And that's not me telling you to, sit crisscross on the floor and focus on one thing for the next ever how long I ramble on. But this is going to be me talking the way I did in many of our older episodes. And today I'm going to be talking about loneliness. Okay, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. So if you're new here, welcome. Of course, as always, I am so glad that you're here. And if you've been around for a while, this might feel a little bit familiar to you because, like I said, it's kind of like some of our older episodes. But if you're new, this is not quite the norm anymore, but I'm excited for it nonetheless, and hopefully y'all are too. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. It's gonna be cathartic, I think, for me, but probably hopefully, I guess, it will ring true for a lot of people. So as of me recording this episode, I have been living alone for the past 3 weeks, and I've never, ever lived by myself. I went from my parents' house to college, dorms and apartments, to living with my best friends, to living with my boyfriend. I've never lived alone. So for the past, again, as I'm recording this, 3 weeks, Adam, my partner, has been on a work trip. So I have had a lot of time by myself. And during that time, I've thought a lot, and I've also been asked a lot by friends and people in my life, how I handle it, basically. What it's like spending all this time by myself, what it's like being without Adam for all of this time, because we live together. So it is very different having the house all to myself and that kind of thing. And of course, I've been thinking about that idea of loneliness and of being alone and how those are so different. So different. And I think that first and foremost, recognizing the difference between those is essential. I have known people who could be so incredibly lonely in a room full of people who loved them. They were so lonely because they didn't know themselves, or they didn't know who they wanted to be, or whatever, a slew of reasons, or they were insecure, like I said, a slew of reasons. And I've also known people who are completely satisfied and at home being alone, and they don't feel lonely during that time. And that, I think, tends to come from security. If you truly don't feel lonely, that comes from security, from sureness of yourself, and all of those other things. But there's so much more to it, too. I myself have certainly been in plenty of situations where I have been with people who loved me or who I was close with in one way or another, and have felt incredibly lonely. I was an only child, and that didn't really, or I am an only child. I don't have any new siblings. But being an only child, that I think is one of the reasons that now, as an adult who I've become very, very secure in myself, or at least pretty secure in myself, I would say. Um, I'm not bothered as much by being alone. And I do truly think that being an only child has really helped me with that. But at the same time, I was often the one in my friend group who ended up kind of being pushed to the side, or at least that's how I felt. You know, when you've got three friends walking down the sidewalk and they don't all fit, I was always the one who was walking in the back. And that's really fucking sad. And it was really hard. And I look back on that now and, oh, I hurt. I hurt for little Alanna because that hurt so bad in that moment. And I don't entirely blame my friends. They didn't know, I guess. They didn't notice. I don't think that it was malicious. And if it was, well, they're really not my friends anymore. So it doesn't really matter. But, you know, we were all kids. We were growing. We were learning all of that good stuff. But I think back to how it made me feel. Or like I was always the one in the back seat who couldn't hear what was being talked about in the front or whatever. So now if I get put in the back seat, I just live in my own world until we get where we're going. Or on the flip side, I have noticed that all of that loneliness that I felt as a kid has really shaped how I approach relationships as an adult. So if I'm the one in the front seat and somebody else gets put in the back seat, I make sure to turn all the way around to make sure that they're a part of the conversation. I make sure that if somebody has to be the tip of the triangle walking behind two of us on the sidewalk, I make sure that they still know that they're included. I really, really personally go out of my way to make sure that people know that they're included, because I know very intimately how that kind of exclusion and loneliness feels, right? And I also know how it feels to be lonely in a relationship where you love somebody and you're with them. You might be physically with them, physically in the room with them, physically on the couch with them, but they don't feel present. They don't feel like they care about you. They don't feel like they care about what you have to say or what you think about the relationship or any of those things. And so I try very hard now with Adam to make sure that he knows that I care. I care what he's doing. I care what he feels. I ask him all the time, "Are you okay? How was your day?" If he seems off, I'm asking him, "Are you sure that you're okay?" And it gets on his nerves, but I'm like, I don't want you to feel like I don't care, because I have felt that before and it doesn't feel good. So for all of those reasons, I think loneliness is it's something that I've experienced very intimately, and something that I have really had to come to terms with. And I've had to face that fear in many ways of being lonely and of being alone, both of them. And luckily for me, I've come out the other side and have, as I said, learned a lot from childhood and young adulthood about how I don't like to be treated by friends or in a relationship. But I've also learned a lot about how to entertain myself. I've learned a lot about how to sit still with myself, how to be alone with myself and not feel lonely. And that's something that I definitely had to learn as a kid, because I spent a lot of time by myself. I spent a lot of time in the summer. It was, even if I wasn't by myself home alone, my grandma was there, but we didn't always get along when I was a kid because I had ideas of what I wanted to be doing. And most of the time that was devouring books. And she had ideas of what I should be doing, which was not devouring books. We have very different priorities, she and I. So luckily, I would, spend time with her for sure, but luckily I have had a lot of practice being by myself. So now that I'm older and I've been able to cope with some of the things I talked about, friends being kind of the odd man out, that kind of thing, but also cope with any fears and insecurities I've had of being physically alone, being scared to be alone, all of that. Luckily, I haven't had to be scared of being alone with my thoughts and being alone with my time. And for that, I am certainly grateful. But I will admit that there have been times in my life that I have been scared to be alone with my thoughts. Therefore, about a year and a half, I would say, I had a really, really difficult go with depression and my anxiety on top of that. And I've talked about it before, but depression is something that I've fought with for a very long time. And looking back now, I realize that anxiety is also something that I have had for probably my whole entire life. But I went on medication for it in March of 2020. So now, wow, coming up this March, I'm going on 4 years of Lexapro. So shout out to her for keeping me alive. But there was a while there, certainly before I went on the Lexapro, but still afterwards too, where I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. I didn't want to be left in a place where I had to face the things that I was thinking about because they were not things that I was equipped to cope with at that point in time. And that's one of the reasons I had to get medicated, because everything that I was feeling and thinking, it was all too big for me. It was too big. It was not something I could handle. It was not something that I had ever been taught how to handle, nor was it something that I had the resources other than medication at that point in time to deal with. And I mean, I'm talking everything from grief to commitment in my relationship, because Adam and I were still a fairly new relationship at that point. We were just over a year in, so I was scared of committing. I was grieving for my grandfather. He had just passed away. I was going through a lot of things. I was preparing to graduate with my master's degree. COVID was happening, so I had all of these health concerns. I was worried about my master's degree, about getting a job, about, which we see how that went, about getting a job, about, moving into this next stage of life. All of these things came at me. And then COVID happened, and luckily I was living with my two very best friends, and I was never alone. But still, all of that being in one place, it really, being stuck in the house, or like only being able to go on walks in the neighborhood, that kind of thing, that really affected me in a lot of ways. And I didn't cope with it very well. I didn't employ all of these things that I've just told you about that I learned as an only child, et cetera, et cetera. I kept my hands busy, right? And my mind busy sometimes. I read books, I learned new things, whatever. But I really focused on keeping my hands or my feet busy, going on walks, doing projects, whatever it was, or distracting myself. So the girls and I would make margaritas at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday and sit in the driveway and talk about absolutely nothing, but it distracted us. It was something that we didn't normally get to do, and it kept all of us from thinking about all of the things that we didn't want to think about and we didn't want to cope with. Not the least of which being that was our last summer together, the three of us, Allison and Taylor and I. That was our last summer living together, living in the same city, all of those things. We were going to move out in the fall. So it was a lot, and I really didn't take that time to learn how to distract myself. I went on to have even more crazy life things happen that fall when Adam and I moved in together. And he and I spent our time, we were both unemployed for a while, and we spent our time make breakfast together. We would watch a show together. We would go to the gym together for 2 hours. We would come home and make food together. I mean, it was always doing something and distracting ourselves. And then he would go play video games. And then I would be left alone. And that's when I started leaning really on comfort shows like Bob's Burgers or whatever. There's a handful, but Bob's Burgers is obviously the number one. To distract me and to kind of be my mind rot. I don't want to think. I don't want to use my brain, right? And still to this day, that's what I use it for. It's comforting, yeah, but it's mind rot. Well, I mean, it's not total mind rot. It's not like Family Guy or something, or SpongeBob, whatever. But it's easy for me. It's easy. I'm in some Bob's Burgers Facebook groups, and people comment the most wild things in there, and they're like, "Can somebody explain this?" And we're all like, "It's a joke." What do you mean, can we explain it? Anyway, so it's easy for me. It's brain rot for me. Some people, it goes over their heads, I guess. But I'm smarter than the average bear, my papa used to say. Anyway, so over the past few years, I have kind of gotten tired of distracting myself like that. And, it goes through phases, I would say. When I have a regular job and I'm getting out of the house and all of that good stuff, that's one kind of distraction. And then I'm able to come home and put what little energy I have left into something else. But then I don't have as much energy to sit in my thoughts, So it's all of these things. And I think that that's why a lot of people don't consciously realize that they're lonely, or it takes them a while to. And it's because they just don't have the mental energy for it. And that's not to say that they're not lonely. That's not to say that they're not trying to fill those voids with one thing or another, or even just feeling lonely, but they don't have the mental capacity to cope with it or to do something about it, right? So for me, I have been technically unemployed since the end of October 2023 when we moved to Tampa. And I've been spending a lot of time by myself, and it has definitely encouraged me to, first of all, to be the exploring, independent person that I was before COVID. Because honestly, before COVID, I got out and I did things by myself all the time. And, obviously, COVID put a little bit of a stop to that for a while. But once we moved to Florida, I was keeping busy with other things. So it became a little bit harder. So now that I'm here literally by myself for 3 weeks, I don't have a job to go to. It's just me and Winnie hanging out in the house for a month by ourselves. I have to remember who I am and have to kind of embrace that part of myself again. And for me, that's been fun. And that is me turning a time when I could be lonely and I could just be missing Adam, and I do miss Adam, but I could just be sitting around missing him, and I'm turning it into opportunities for us to do things that I might not do if he was home. Or I might try to wait for the weekend to do it together or whatever it is. It's encouraging me to get out and do things on my own. That's not to say either that I don't do things on my own when he's here, because if he listens to this, he'll be like, I told you that you need to go out more when I'm at work during the day. And I'm like, Adam, I do things all the time. Like, I know how to get around Tampa better than you do. Hello? Because I drive around. Anyway, I digress. So all of this is to say that there are so many different kinds of loneliness and of being alone, and they're different, but they overlap as well. And I've just been thinking about it a lot lately for obvious reasons, because I've had the time and energy to. And I wanted to talk to you guys about it. I wanted to kind of tell you about my experiences with it, obviously. But I also just wonder what it's like for you. Do you like to be alone? Do you want to be left alone? Do you want to be in a room full of people all the time? Do you feel lonely when your partner's at work or when your friends are busy? Do you avoid your own thoughts and thus being alone is scary for you because it might have you facing things that you're not ready to face yet? I'm curious, because I think we all experience aloneness and loneliness differently, very differently. And yet it's such an innate feeling that transcends culture and transcends place and time and experience and all of those things. We all know what those pangs of loneliness feel like, just like we all know that it can either be scary or empowering to be alone. This past 3 weeks, it's kind of been empowering. to be alone, to be reminded of how independent I am, to be reminded of the things that I can do in a day without Adam, But also, when I was moving here and I was driving by myself for 6 hours and my car broke down, well, my car didn't break down, my tire almost fell off, and I was stranded on the side of the interstate at a seedy motel alone. That wasn't lonely, that was scary, right? And then, like I said, there have been times where I've been with my friends or with my family and I've been lonely because I don't feel like they're seeing me or I don't feel like they're including me. And so there's all these different experiences that I think are so, like I said, they're so innately human. We have all felt those things in one way or another at one time or another. So I wanted to do this episode and kind of talk about my experiences with it, and I want to know how you guys experience it. When do you find yourself feeling lonely? When do you find yourself feeling lonely versus alone versus whatever? I'm just so curious. So let us know. Comment on the Instagram post for this episode or on the blog post. Send us an email. Respond to the Spotify question bar thing. Whatever it is. Let us know. I'm genuinely curious how or when you experience loneliness or kind of how it feels for you. Because for me, it feels so empty. Loneliness does. It feels so empty and it feels so sad, as opposed to when I'm alone and I'm comfortable, but I'm alone, I don't feel anything. But if I'm alone and I'm in a different or stressful situation, I feel stressed or I feel scared. It's just so interesting to me, and I'm starting to fade a little bit, but it's so interesting to me the different ways that we can all experience the same emotions, or the different ways and the different times and the different situations where we can experience the same emotions, or the different circumstances that bring about those same innately human emotions within us. Something that feels lonely to me might not feel lonely to you, and vice versa. And being alone might feel lonely to you, whereas to me it feels perfectly fine. And the way that we can grow through those too, how being alone when I was 18 would have felt far more lonely than it does now at 28, and all of the in between. So, anyway, to round out this episode, because why not? It's been chaotic enough as it is. I want to read you all a poem about aloneness and solitude. This is The Sound of One Fork by Minnie Bruce Pratt. Through the window screen, I can see an angle of gray roof and the silence that spreads in the branches of the pecan tree as the sun goes down. I am waiting for a lover. I am alone, in a solitude that vibrates like the cicada in hot mid-morning, that waits like the lobed sassafras leaf just before its dark green turns into red, that waits like the honeybee in the mouth of the purple lobelia. While I wait, I can hear the random clink of one fork against a plate. The woman next door is eating supper alone. She is 60 perhaps, and for many years has eaten by herself the tomatoes, the corn, and okra that she grows in her backyard garden. Her small metallic sound persists, as quiet almost as the windless silence, persists like the steady random click of a red bird cracking a few more seeds before the sun gets too low. She does not hurry. She does not linger. Her younger neighbors think that she is lonely, but I know what sufficiency she may possess. I know what can be gathered from year to year, gathered from what is near to hand, as I do elderberries that bend in damp thickets by the road, gathered and preserved, jars and jars shining in rows of clary red, made at times with help a friend or a lover, but consumed long after they are gone, and I sit alone at the kitchen table. And when I sit in the last heat of Sunday afternoons on the porch steps in the acid breath of the boxwoods, I also know desolation. The week is over, the coming night will not lift. I am exhausted from making each day. My family, my children live in other states, the women I love in other towns. I would rather be here than with them in the old ways, but when all that's left of the sunset is the red reflection underneath the clouds, when I get up and come in to fix supper in the darkened kitchen, I am often lonely for them. In the morning and the evening we are by ourselves, the woman next door and I. Still we persist. I open the drawer to get out the silverware. She goes to her garden to pull weeds and pick the crookneck squash that turn yellow with late summer. I walk down to the pond in the morning to watch and wait for the blue heron who comes at first light to feed on minnows that swim through her shadow in the water. She stays until the day grows so bright that she cannot endure it and leaves with her hunger unsatisfied. She bows her wings and slowly lifts into flight, gray and slate blue against a paler sky. I know she will come back. I see the light create a russet curve of land on the farther bank where the wild rice bends heavy and ripe under the first blackbirds. I know she will come back. I see the light curve in the fall and rise of her wing. That was The Sound of One Fork from The Dirt She Ate, New and Selected Poems by Minnie Bruce Pratt. And when I tell you the tears that it brought to my eyes, and I'm sure you could probably hear a little bit of a crack in my voice, the difference between aloneness and loneliness, the difference between how we assume that people feel and how self-sufficient and perfectly fine they might feel as the older next door neighbor. She may be lonely, or she may be perfectly fine in her solitude, just as the narrator is perfectly fine in her solitude, except in those moments where she really, really misses her loved ones. And she watches the blue heron, and she relates to the blue heron. That knowledge that the heron flies off, but it will always come back. All right, y'all. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of I've Been Thinking. Again, this was kind of in the style of older episodes, but hopefully that's okay with you to have that every once in a while. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you about loneliness today, and I've really, really enjoyed that this episode inspired me to think about it in ways that I haven't actively thought about loneliness in a while, and aloneness and solitude. So thank you for that, and thank you for inspiring me to find that poem by Miss Minnie Bruce Pratt. That was fantastic, and I really, really enjoyed it. And thank you for listening to I've Been Thinking, whether this was your first episode or whether this is your 139th. I appreciate you. I appreciate every single one of you. You're the reason that we're here. Now, I do want to remind you to follow along wherever you listen, Spotify, Apple Pods, Spreaker, wherever it is. Give us a subscribe, give us a follow, give us a like, whatever it's called there. Also, check us out on Instagram at I've Been Thinking Pod. Check us out on TikTok at I've Been Thinking Pod. Check us out on Facebook, I've Been Thinking with Alanna Grace. It's the same exact content as Instagram, so don't worry if you're on one but not another, you're not missing anything. And check out our website, I'veBeenThinkingPod.com. That's where you'll find more about us, more about myself, Alanna, and producer Tyler, more about our journey and what kind of brought us here. You'll find old episodes, old blog posts, everything in between, and there's all kinds of goodies on there. So also, if you're interested, check out our Patreon. Our New Year's resolution, as I've been thinking, is to work on more and more Patreon content for you all. So if you go check it out, give us a subscribe there, throw a couple bucks at us a month, you'll really encourage us to make even better Patreon content for you guys. All right, thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble for all this time. I love you guys so freaking much. You are the reason that we keep doing this, and I will talk at you next time. Bye. This episode of I've Been Thinking was hosted, edited, and produced by me, Alanna Grace Campbell. We can't wait for our producer, Tyler Miller, to come back for the next episode. He's been playing hooky. And we are proudly presented by Stoveleg Media.